That's all she could say, when the black girl she abandoned walked into her husband's funeral, wearing heels and holding the locket they swore never existed. 30 years later, she didn't come to cry. She came to confront. Comment: where are you listening from today? Take a breath, and listen close. The rain drummed against the windshield as Shirley Lloyd pulled into the cemetery parking lot, her hands trembling on the steering wheel. 30 years. 30 years since she'd been left at St. Karen's orphanage with nothing but a worn blanket and a hastily written note that simply read, "Please take care of her." Now at 30, Shirley was a successful real estate investor with her own firm, a beautiful home, and everything she'd ever dreamed of, except answers. The private investigator's manila envelope sat on her passenger seat containing the truth she'd searched for since she was old enough to understand what abandonment meant. Chris and Tina Snow, your biological parents. Can you imagine the shock of discovering your past like this? The funeral was already underway when Shirley stepped out of her car. She'd chosen to wear her finest black dress, not out of respect for the man who'd rejected her existence, but as armor for what was to come. Through the rain, she could see the modest gathering around the gravesite. Her eyes immediately found the woman she'd studied in photographs for months. Tina Snow, now 65, her once blonde hair faded to silver, her shoulders curved inward as if carrying an invisible weight. Shirley had learned everything about them. Chris Snow, a bitter man who'd spent his life drowning his failures in gambling and alcohol. Tina Snow, born Marguerite Jean Baptiste in Haiti, who'd hidden her heritage for decades under bleached hair and a forced American accent. The woman who'd given birth to her in 1994, taken one look at her dark skin, and made a choice that would haunt them both forever. The father would never accept her, the private investigator had explained. From what I gathered, he threatened to leave your mother if she kept you, said he wouldn't raise someone else's child, even though the DNA was clear. You were his. Shirley touched the locket around her neck. A gift from her adoptive parents, Eric and Marjorie Lloyd, who'd given her everything Chris Snow had refused to provide: love, support, and the belief that she was worthy of both. They'd never hidden the fact that she was adopted, but they'd also never pushed her to search for her biological family. When you're ready, they'd always said, we'll support whatever you decide. Ready? Was anyone ever ready to confront the people who'd thrown them away? The service was ending. Shirley watched from behind a large oak tree as mourners began to disperse. She'd planned this moment countless times: what she'd say, how she'd approach, whether she'd reveal who she was. But now, seeing Tina's hollow eyes and the way she moved like a ghost among the few remaining friends, Shirley felt something unexpected: pity. Tina lingered at the graveside long after everyone else had gone. Shirley stepped closer, her heart pounding so loudly she was sure it would give her away. She could see the woman's lips moving in what might have been prayer or perhaps just words she'd never been able to say aloud. "Excuse me," Shirley said softly, stepping into view. Tina looked up, startled. For a moment, their eyes met, brown searching brown. And Shirley saw something flicker across the older woman's face. Recognition? Impossible. But something. "I'm sorry for your loss," Shirley continued, her voice steadier than she felt. "Thank you." Tina's voice carried traces of an accent she tried so hard to hide. "Did you know Chris?" Shirley almost laughed at the bitter irony. Know him? He was half her DNA, the reason for her existence, and the source of her abandonment all at once. "Not personally," Shirley replied carefully. "But I knew of him. My name is Shirley Lloyd." She watched Tina's face closely, but if the name meant anything to her, she didn't show it. "I'm Tina," she said, then added almost apologetically, "his wife, his widow," Shirley corrected silently. The woman who'd chosen him over her own child was now alone. And from the looks of her worn clothing and the single old car left in the parking lot, she was struggling financially as well. Mrs. Snow, Shirley began, then paused. How do you tell someone you're the child they abandoned? How do you bridge 30 years of silence with words? But before Shirley could continue, Tina's phone rang, a shrill, demanding sound that made her jump. She fumbled for it with shaking hands. Hello? Tina's voice cracked. Yes, this is she. What? No, please. I told you I need more time. He just died today. A long pause. 2 weeks? But you said I had until the end of the month. Shirley watched the color drain from Tina's face as she listened to whoever was on the other end of the call. I understand. Yes, I understand. Tina hung up and stood there for a moment, swaying slightly. Are you all right? Shirley asked, genuinely concerned despite everything. Tina looked at her with eyes that held decades of pain. They're taking the house, Chris. He used it as collateral for his gambling debts. I have 2 weeks to get out. She let out a sound that was half laugh, half sob. 35 years of marriage and this is what I'm left with. Nothing. Shirley felt her carefully planned confrontation crumble. This broken woman standing before her wasn't the villain she'd imagined. She was a victim, too, of Chris's choices, of her own fear, of a life lived in the shadows of someone else's darkness. Mrs. Snow, Shirley said gently, I think we need to talk. But not here. Not like this. Tina looked at her curiously. Talk about what? Shirley took a deep breath. After 30 years of wondering, it was time about the baby girl you left at St. Karen's orphanage in 1994. The words hung in the air between them like a confession. Tina's eyes widened, her hand flying to her mouth as if to stop the gasp that escaped. Anyway, she stared at Shirley. Really looked at her this time, taking in her features, her skin tone, the shape of her eyes. No, Tina whispered. It can't be. You can't be. But as she spoke, Shirley could see the recognition dawning in her eyes. The terrible, beautiful, devastating truth settling over both of them like the rain that continued to fall on Chris Snow's grave. Tina's legs gave out. She sank onto the wet bench beside Chris's grave, her entire body shaking as if the cold October rain had seeped into her bones. Shirley moved closer, instinctively, wanting to comfort this woman who had caused her so much pain, yet looked so fragile in this moment. You're her, Tina whispered, her voice barely audible above the rain. You're the baby she couldn't finish the sentence. The baby you left, Shirley completed gently. Yes, I'm your daughter. The words seemed to physically wound Tina. She doubled over, pressing her hands to her stomach as sobs racked her body. Oh God. Oh my God. I knew. I always wondered. But Chris said we could never look back. He made me promise. Shirley sat down beside her, careful to maintain some distance. Every instinct told her to comfort this crying woman. But 30 years of abandonment created a barrier she wasn't ready to cross completely. Tell me what happened, Shirley said quietly. I need to know why. Tina looked up at her through tears, studying Shirley's face as if trying to memorize every feature. You look like me, she said with wonder. When I was young, back in Haiti, before I learned to hide who I was, she wiped her eyes with trembling hands. I was barely 23 when I met Chris. He was so handsome, so confident. He promised me a better life in America away from the poverty I'd known. But he was ashamed of my heritage. Made me dye my hair, change my accent, never speak Creole again. I became Tina instead of Marguerite. I thought if I could just be what he wanted, he'd love me completely. Shirley felt a strange mix of anger and sympathy. And when you got pregnant, we'd been trying for years, Tina continued, her voice growing stronger as